2015. It's the year of Marty McFly's hoverboards, and it's the 70th anniversary of World War II. It's also the first year in which people like me can vote in a general election to find out who's going to get to sit in there. The problem is that people in there don't really care about people like me, right? Or do they? I don't really know. Yeah, I can vote, but frankly, why should I? I was too young to vote in 2010, the last general election, and unless you were born in 1992 or before, so were you. All I, and possibly we, could do was sit back and watch. Watch Clegmania unfold. Watch the polls close before everyone had a chance to vote. Watch the formation of the first peacetime coalition since 1931. Watch tuition fees go up instead of down. Watch riots break out on the streets of London, apparently so people can steal value packs of basmati rice. Watch a group of people that we didn't vote for govern our lives. Well, given our famously short attention span, it was only a matter of time before we young people needed something new to watch. Something exciting, something revolutionary, something optimistic, something like...
The duty of the powerful is to protect the people who don't have the privilege of such power. And that should always be the bias. That should always be the bias. If you see the powerful protecting the powerful or further enhancing the privilege of the privileged, that's not a good system. So this is the balance.
Has that ever been thus? I mean, has there ever been a case where the powerful have taken upon themselves to protect the poor?
But we are involved. No, probably not, mate.
R. Russell Brand, arguably Britain's most eloquent comedian since Ken Dodd. Film star, sex god, and hilariously funny, a hugely talented entertainer. But now, apparently, he's also the fourth most important thinker of all time, in the world, ever. A millionaire man of the people. Robin Hood meets Robin Williams. Now, I don't know about you, but I love celebrities. They're just better than normal people. They're smarter, they're prettier, they're more intelligent, they're just generally more important than other human beings. But what about when celebrities get involved in politics? The so-called celebritization of politics. Is that a good thing?
It's a tricky one, I think. I mean, I'm very delighted that anybody gets engaged and serious about things. I mean, Eddie is talking about housing, for example, I think is very interesting. I do think it would be a mistake to think that that's where the centre of the debate could be. My experience with these debates is that they're really, really complex, and that's why they're so difficult to get right. It's because you have to balance and reconcile an awful lot of complicated aspects, and that's perhaps not something that a celebrity can very effectively do because he or she might not have the time or the inclination to really get engaged with the detail of it. But as a way of kind of highlighting the issues and getting people to talk, then I think that would be great.
There's absolutely no reason why celebrities, whatever that means, should not be involved in politics. Everybody should be involved in politics if they want to. They shouldn't be dragooned into it. And if Russell Brand wants to spout his vacuous comments, fine. And if people want to listen to them, fine. I personally take strong exception to the notion that people shouldn't bother to vote. I did my very best to read the book that he wrote on the subject, and I can't say that I was overly impressed.
You're not a fan, but...
I think Russell Brand has many talents. I don't think his...
Politics is not necessarily...
I don't think he is necessarily the guiding star that I would follow if I were concerned about which direction my own politics would take.
I think it's quite a good thing that celebrities do show an involvement with politics, just as it's desirable that everyone should. But as long as it's not done too frivolously.
But if there's one thing I like more than shiny celebrities, it's television. But telly's future itself could be threatened by the outcome of this general election. BBC Three, for years, has been the young person's channel, but the corporation are planning on scrapping it and moving it online. 250,000 signatures and protests have done nothing to change their mind. They're still keeping BBC 4, by the way, showing documentaries about trains and yeast, but the channel that launched James Corden, Russell Howard and so many others are just being thrown away to save money. Why is that? Because of the licence fee. This yearly payment, paid by us, has been how the BBC has funded itself since it was created in 1926. But every 10 years a group of MPs from all three major parties gather in what's called a select committee to decide whether it should change, although nothing's ever been changed before except maybe putting the price up a bit. But this time it's different. There's talk of scrapping the licence fee altogether and turning it into some kind of ITV Fox News hybrid that relies on competing for profit. So why is this important? Well, everything about the BBC, from Gavin and Stacey to the news to Doctor Who, all depend upon the licence fee. And now a group of MPs who we elected through general elections are thinking of changing the very core of television. So, should young people be worried about the future of the BBC?
I think the health of the BBC is absolutely fundamental to everybody, and also fundamental, I'd argue, to a functioning democracy.
Absolutely.
I'm a kind of licence fee advocate because I think it's the best way of protecting the independence of the BBC, that it has monopoly of revenue. But how you do that in a much more complex world now, I think is really difficult. I hate the idea of subscription because I think one thing about the BBC, love it or hate it, we all have a stake in it. And I think it can make other broadcasters honest too, which is very important. Unless it was a subscription basis, then I think it wouldn't have that function. I would hate to see that go.
Well, of course, I think young people should be worried about the BBC. The BBC is the most important cultural institution in the country, if not in the world. And yes, I mean, you'd have to be very foolish, in my view, not to be concerned about the future of the BBC. But this is for greater minds than mine to worry about. It's a huge... The fact is, the media is changing beyond recognition. I mean, even you, young as you are, have seen things change a huge amount in the last few years, and in the next few years, God alone knows where it's going to go.
So you think the general election could have serious ramifications for the BBC, or it'll continue?
No, I don't think that. I mean, there's no party running in that's likely to exercise power that wants to see an end to the BBC. They want to change things. Some politicians want to change things, of course, and so they should. I mean, this is a democracy, and we are, I hope, a democratic institution. Yes. But no, I don't think the election itself will have much of an impact on the BBC. But it hasn't in the past 100 years, so I don't see why it should change now.
Well, this is very confusing. If only we had someone to talk to who was actually on the select committee itself. Conor Burns, thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure.
Since 2012, you've been a member of the House of Commons Culture, Media and Sport Committee, and most recently on the Select Committee deciding the future of the BBC. Do you think the general election could have serious ramifications on the BBC, particularly in terms of funding?
No, I think there is a debate that is clearly starting, and our Select Committee produced a report on the back of many months of evidence that we took from people who are expert. And I think there is a legitimate debate to be had about what is the best way of getting that money in a very competitive environment. We're obviously at the period where the charter is running out and needs to be renewed, and it's very important that the BBC is on a secure platform for the next period of charter review. So the debate really is this: at the moment we have got a universal levy that is based upon the historic idea of a piece of manufactured equipment that is sitting in the corner, usually of a living room, that everybody is sitting around viewing output at the same time as somebody centrally is pushing a button, or whatever it is they do, to make that output go out. That is dramatically changing now as people are catching up, watching television that may have been broadcast last night, last week, last month or last year, and they don't need a license fee for that. So they could be watching all of the content that is available whilst making no contribution to that at all. That's clearly unsustainable, particularly if the pace of that change in technology grows. And the question is how you get that funding model right to reflect that change in consumption of BBC content. So one of the recommendations, and bear in mind that when you have a cross-party committee comprising Conservative, Liberal, Democrat and Labour colleagues, to get to a point of agreement to vote something through as a committee recommendation, that is usually a watered-down version of the two extremes. So the two extreme positions would be you carry on the basis of collection from a device, you have to have a licence fee if you're watching BBC content in your home. The other alternative is you set the BBC, some would say, free, and they get out there and they compete on the same basis as everybody else for revenue. And within the two, then there are big debates about what the BBC actually does. So for example, if the BBC is justifying the universal licence fee on the basis that it is a public service broadcaster, well, that's fine. But why then should it be producing, for example, programmes like Strictly Come Dancing that go head to head with commercial content on ITV at the same time on a Saturday night?
So it shouldn't compete in the ratings war?
And it's not necessarily saying that. It's saying that if you want to justify the universality of the licence fee on the basis of public service broadcasting, then there is a legitimate debate to take place about why should it be doing all the stuff that is perfectly properly capable of being delivered through the independent sector, the private sector, who have to generate advertising revenues to fund that.
Should young people be worried about the future of the BBC?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the BBC is a great national treasure. It's also one of the ways that the United Kingdom projects soft power abroad. I mean, anybody who thinks that we should get rid of the BBC should just spend a little time travelling to some other English-speaking countries and see the quality of output and compare it to what we have here. I think the BBC's future is secure.
Well, that's television sorted. But what about other media? Say, newspapers? In 1992, Conservative John Major was elected into office. The Sun's headline ran, "It was the Sun what won it." In 1997, they backed Blair, and he won. Can they do it again in 2015?
I think the Sun will certainly have an influence on it. We've got 5 million readers every day, which is a significant chunk of the population.
Yes, and if they all turn out to vote, that would be
exactly that would make a difference. There's always been debate as to whether it was actually the Sun what won it, and the number of times that I have cabinet ministers or shadow cabinet ministers phoning me up shows that they still feel that we have a bit of influence going on.
Absolutely, but if a single organisation can whip votes and influence government, doesn't it make it a lobbyist?
I guess so, but that's the great thing about newspapers. You're partisan. You take sides. The broadcast media is restrained by Ofcom regulations, and that's probably right. Whereas newspapers are wild and unpredictable and yeah, exactly. You can do what they want.
What are your thoughts then on media, specifically newspapers, tabloids most explicitly, in terms of backing certain political parties, almost acting arguably as a sort of lobbyist for that campaign?
Like, it's always been thus.
It has,
the
yes.
Newspapers have always backed one horse or another, and I'm a bit sceptical as to how much notice the general public take of what they read in the newspapers.
Even with the headlines, The Sun, what won it, and so on?
Even there, yes.
Okay. Voter turnouts are generally pretty bad. We've never had 100% turnout in Britain. The closest we've ever had in recent years is 83.9%, but that was all the way back in 1950. In 2010, we had a 65% turnout, meaning that 35% of everyone who could have voted didn't. It could have been a lot worse, though. A short time ago, I met the Polish ambassador, and he told me that in the last Polish election, there was only a 22% turnout. 22. It would seem, therefore, that people, by and large, aren't too keen on voting. But then something odd happened. In Scotland. The 2014 yes-no referendum, held here in this beautiful country of tartan, haggis and John Barrowman, attracted a turnout of 84%. That's huge, and totally obliterating that Polish 22%. Now, the more voters that turn out to vote means that we get a better representation of what the country wants. That's just obvious. So how can we bottle this Scottish spirit and use it for the general election? Basically, I suppose my question really is, how, in your view, can this election be more like Scotland and less like Poland?
What an interesting question.
The referendum you had a very clear cause and effect.
Yeah.
So, if you voted for something, it was going to happen the next day.
And I think because it was a clear choice, it was yes or it was no, and it was not a revisitable choice.
At a general election, you're voting for things that might happen. You're voting for a leader. You're voting for a government.
So if we elect a government, one of the great things about our system, if you elect a government you end up not liking.
You can change your mind 5 years hence.
This was a decision about Scotland's future inside the United Kingdom. I think there were two things around it. One, it was forever, and it really was a historic in that sense. Politicians use the phrase historic far too often. This was genuinely a historic decision for them to take. And the second thing, I think there was mass uncertainty about what would happen if they did vote for independence. There was no clarity on whether they could continue to use sterling, whether they could become members of the European Union. I think that added a lot to the fact that it was yes or no and real ramifications.
So do you think that the diversity of options actually stops the turnout?
Yeah.
So it's not as black or white.
You have to think about a lot more things. Whereas in the, as I say, in the referendum, it very much was, look, if you vote yes, there'll be independence tomorrow, and so that made a lot of people turn out to vote no, I think.
Okay.
I don't think we can do that in this general election, because this ultimately is an election that decides, is it going to be David Cameron or is it going to be Ed Miliband who's going to lead the next government, whatever formulation that takes. That will not, with the best will in the world and with the greatest of respect to both of them, that would not have the same sort of long-lasting implication as whether England should leave the United Kingdom, which is the question that Scotland was asking itself about itself.
Well, I mean, I thought it was great that we had such a high turnout for the referendum. I think it was the highest percentage of vote in any democratic event anywhere in the UK. I think it will be hard to reach those heights again at a general election, but in Scotland, for some reason, more people vote at a general election than do in a Scottish election. So in 2010 at the general, it was about 2/3 of Scots turned out to vote, and at the Scottish election just a year later it was only about half. So I think at this general election we'll be up about maybe 75, maybe 80% at a push, and we want to see as many people get involved as possible.
You clearly have a great amount of ambition, and you've mentioned before that you don't fancy David Cameron's job, yet he seems very keen for you to fill his shoes. Why aren't you so keen?
I think David Cameron is absolutely the right person to be Prime Minister of this country, and I don't know how he's done it for the last 10 years. First 5 years being leader of the UK party, leader of the opposition, and then 5 years leading a G7 nation. I mean, it's an exceptionally hard job, and he wants to go on and do another 5 years, and I think he is the right man for that job. I have to say, my ambitions do not run in that direction. I'm quite happy doing, I think, a big job here in Scotland and trying to get the Scottish Conservatives back up on their feet. Honestly, I think being a Prime Minister is probably one of the loneliest jobs in the world. So,
but First Minister is not?
I think it's different. I think that there are certainly I would be staying closer to home. I wouldn't be up and down to London just quite so much. But yeah, I mean, I think all leadership roles actually have an element of loneliness in them. And I'm ambitious for my party. I'm ambitious for my country. I'm not necessarily ambitious for myself.
So, divisiveness, black and whiteness, doesn't really help with the rainbow politics we have today. But that idea that you have a binary ballot, that does seem to ring true. I mean, looking at the electoral turnouts, around Margaret Thatcher's time it was hitting 75%, 10% more than we are today. And you don't really get more divisive than old Maggie. But is that really the reason? Oh, if only we had someone who knew her to talk to.
You've often spoken about your long-lasting and friendship with Margaret Thatcher in the last years of her life. She's probably as divisive a figure in your generation as any. Do you think that the black or whiteness of that attracted so many of your generation to the polling booths?
That's a really, really good question. And yes, Lady Thatcher was a very divisive political figure, and to a degree she relished that. She was a believer in getting things done. She was a believer that politics, she once said, politics at its purest is philosophy in action. And her government was a particular political philosophy very much in action. She had no truck with opinion polls or focus groups. She believed those were for the birds. She always said she was only interested in one focus group or opinion poll, and that was the one that every member of the British society had the opportunity to participate in. It was a general election, and she did point out she was quite good at those. She had won 3 of them, and unlike Mr Blair, she got more votes at her third election than Mr Blair got 5 million fewer at his third than at his first. that we have such divisive political figures today as politicians, as turnout is in freefall. She was a doer as Prime Minister. I would like to see more doers. And I think one of the reasons there's been a bit of a drop-off in recent years...
Would you say Cameron is not a doer?
I would say that, and I think Cameron said it himself, I think in terms of the domestic legacy that Margaret Thatcher left or Clement Attlee left, I don't think any Prime Minister in peacetime before or since in the 20th century or afterwards will leave such a big mark on the pages of history. That's not a criticism of Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron or Ed Miliband if he follows. I think it's a statement of fact of the impact in those two very, very different but towering political giants of 20th century politics. But I think the other thing that happened, and Blair to some degree, accepted this, she was asked at the last ever dinner she spoke at, which was for me in November 2002 in my old stomping ground Eastleigh, what was your greatest domestic achievement? And she replied, Tony Blair and New Labour, we forced our opponents to change. And to some degree, Blair got elected because he accepted the Thatcherite settlement. He accepted what she had done. He didn't realise privatisation or trade union reform or scrap the equal deterrent. And that sort of meant that actually the agreement between the parties was much greater after her than it was when she was there. And I think that's to some degree why there's maybe less difference and less, therefore, acute interest in the outcomes of elections.
So basically, young people are important. I mean, with the amount of money and time and effort the media are putting into getting the youth involved in politics, surely this youth vote, whatever that may be, is crucial to this election. What do you think, Reverend?
Yes, I think it could. I think we're very significant to this election, but more importantly, take a step back from that. I think it's incredibly important to our health as a functioning society and civilization that young people are engaged with politics. Something I've kind of been involved with for a long time, since the 1980s, really.
Yeah.
But you can't underestimate the importance of it, I think, because it's the next generation of everyone.
Amazing. That's great. We're the key. What do you think, David?
I'm not sure if it's the key to the election, but I certainly think it'll play a part in it. I think you're much more likely actually to get the older people out.
Oh. That's depressing. John, help me out here. We're the key to this election, right?
Well, I think your guess is as good as mine on that. We don't know how many will vote. I suspect, talking to young people, my children range in age from 14 to 48, and certainly the older one would vote, the older one can't. But the impression that I get is that young people want to be engaged. Clearly that depends on the kind of young people you talk to, the demographic group and all that sort of thing. But I suspect they will vote in quite large numbers. Historically, they have voted, by and large anyway, towards the left rather than towards the right, and presumably that pattern will remain this time. But I don't know, we simply don't know. There's no way of telling. That's the great thing about elections.
Okay, this is getting very confusing. I mean, there's Russell Brand, there's Scotland, there's questionable keys. Look, I started with one simple question and I've yet to reach a conclusive, definitive answer to it. All I want to know is why should I vote?
Well, because an election is one moment every 5 years at which we decide who's going to run the show. The fact that we would prefer not to have any of them running the show but somebody quite different is no reason for not deciding which is the best on offer and doing your best to get them into power.
I just think that so many things are decided that you don't want to sit that out, and if you don't vote, then you can't complain afterwards as well. I mean, I think that people fought really hard, and there's people in countries all around the world that would love to be able to have a vote. Now, even if not every single party has a portfolio that you agree with every part of, that there's always an element that you can vote for, and I think as well it's quite important that we don't overstress this apathy. In Scotland, particularly in the last 2 years, there's been a real awakening of democracy. We've had young people coming up, through Better Together, through Yes Scotland, that are getting involved in now party politics, having been involved in campaign politics. And, I don't think and I don't feel that Scotland is apathetic. I think that there's going to be a high turnout at this election, and, I'm doing everything I can to make sure there's as many as possible.
I'm going to vote, and if you don't agree with me, then you're going to be one down to start with. If you want to get even, you have to cancel me out.
Well, I would ask you a couple of questions, I suppose, one of which is, are you entirely happy with the way the country is run at the moment in every single respect? And if your answer to that is, well, no, I don't like this, or I don't like that, I don't like tuition fees, or I don't like whatever it may be, my next question would be, so what are you going to do about it? And you either say, well, I'm going to be active in various sorts of ways. It might be in student politics, it might be this or like that. And, of course, I hope you will say, I am going to vote. Because if you don't exercise your vote, you've absolutely no right to complain about the way things are run.
Because this election vastly matters. This government, even though it's reduced the deficit, is still borrowing massively more every year than it's bringing in tax revenue. This government's added more to the national debt in 5 years than Labour added in 13. And if we don't take decisions to get that under control and get that debt coming down, I tell you why young people should care about this massively, because it's your generation that will end up paying for our failure to get it under control, and our debts will become your burden.
Not so long ago, people died so you could have a vote. Think about that bit and head for a polling booth.
So, should I vote? Of course I should. And you should too. The only thing left to decide is, who for?